Recently, there have been many modern games compared to Dark Souls of Dark Souls fame. We've heard of the sheer difficulty of Cuphead and the unforgiving nature of Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, but I feel that these games' interpretations are a bit shallow. Today, I'm going to explain to you how Cuphead and Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy take inspiration from Dark Souls in a much deeper, richer, and more satisfying manner. Today, I'm going to explain to you how every game is Dark Souls. Every game is Dark Souls because every game requires input in order to properly function, in order to tell the proper canonical story of its narrative. Every game responds to player input in some way, perhaps even in multiple ways. Cuphead, the latest and greatest Pop-U-Fur title, does in fact require input for the game to advance. It's a bit of a classical game design tradition, but it's served well in the cult classic on Platinum Dark Souls, and it works wonders in increasing the emotional impact of Cuphead's moments. In Cuphead, players press left and right to run to the left and to the right, and in Dark Souls the player also presses left and right to move to the left and to the right. These similarities seem obvious, but it's not something anyone else even thought to mention in their interpretations, so it warrants mention here. It's a bold risk and something unheard of in other artistic mediums to integrate such an artistic flair, and it might make the game less accessible to all audiences, but the system of basic input for movement just subtly screams Dark Souls to me. If you go a little farther back to the other recent blockbuster hit original IP, Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, past all its mind-blowing graphics and absolutely instantaneous load times, this game did indeed require input from the player to advance. It's such a clever, easy-to-miss touch that a lot of players will miss, but it's honestly impressive how well they integrated this mechanic into their new game, considering how old and outdated Dark Souls looks like on the Xbox 360 by today's graphical standards. Even more recent titles, such as A Hat in Time, are including this subtle gamer reference by requiring the player to press start, or in this case, any button, to start the game. With so many games that do this, it can't be a coincidence. These titles must be playing homage to the greatest game of all time, Dark Souls. A Hat in Time performs this feat particularly well, however, by requiring input at every stage of the game. It's almost a main mechanic, where other games might use requiring input as an individual level gimmick, such as in The Order 1886. A Hat in Time takes the concept and evolves it throughout the game, transforming it into its own mechanic, owning it in its own way. Like a bird, A Hat in Time flies away with your lunch and eats it on an electric wire. You might be thinking right now, Steve, all the games you're talking about are very similar in that they are platformers of some kind, thus your argument is limited to the subgenre. And I say thee nay, not only do platformers require input to advance, but even a relaxed open-ended simulator such as Animal Crossing does this. Even Animal Crossing, a game you can't even fail, requires input from the player to move on with things. If not, they'll simply ride on the train forever, and that's a fail state in itself. Very risky move to inspire your game on a title that wouldn't come out for another 10 years, a game so tonally and stylistically different, but it feels so natural that it's almost like it's an inherent element of the academic artistic medium. You see, every game requires input to play, just like Dark Souls does, which means that every game has the dark demon blood of Dark Souls in it. However, influence digs even deeper than that. Every game is Dark Souls because every game has content that is not immediately viewable by the player. Dark Souls is famous and infamous for hiding content behind fake walls and demons in the guise of approachable treasure chests. In this piece, the player isn't getting all the information they need in any given frame. It is only after exploring and really learning the lay of the land do players gain any semblance of familiarity and comfort in this dark, dreary world. Whether the hidden content is the code of the game itself or the other levels within the game, the player is at no point able to observe all of the hidden oddities within any given video game. If one were to look at the Crash Bandicoot Insane Trilogy, the player is unable to access all of the content on the Blu-ray disc or digital download that they had purchased without performing some task to get to it. Just like hidden items, Firekeeper souls, passageways, and even secret bosses, Insane Trilogy hides its content from players, allowing them to discover however much of the game they'd like to find within their level of engagement. It's brilliant level design, something that's hard to replicate, but Insane Trilogy really does nail the non-linearity and level of secret optional content right on the head. If that head was the head of a bell gargoyle, because that's a hard boss right there. Cuphead, behind its visual fluff, its borderline distracting attention to detail, and homage to the 1920s of animation, alludes to the 2011s of video games by hiding content outside the borders of the screen. In Cuphead, players cannot view the entire game in one screen, it simply doesn't fit. no matter how full of Technicolor the image is. To view all the content of the game, something must change in the game. Some state must be affected in some way before the screen slides over, revealing hidden secrets and goodies. But even then, when the new content presents itself, the old content goes back into hiding. It's a cacophony of hide and seek and of keeping track of things. Similarly, in Dark Souls and even Demon's Souls, players could not see the entire world in one screen, and they too had to move around to see the other area. What's behind this open hallway? You gotta walk through the hallway to find out. But as they move, the space of hallway they previously occupied becomes hidden again. It's like cycles. It's like the cycle of the fading fire and the curse of the undead, transformatively and uniquely repeating itself yet telling its own unique story in Dark Souls 2 with the exact same fighting mechanics but worse. Brilliant reintegration in the Souls sequels and very clever reintegration in Cuphead. Hiding information within the game's code isn't exclusive to the AAAs and the Chads. A Hat in Time shows an admirable effort of the same technique. The player is unable to access all of the content of the Blu-ray disc or digital download that they had purchased without performing some task to get to it once again. Just like hidden items, Firekeeper souls, passageways, and even secret bosses, A Hat in Time hides its content from players, forcing them to move on to future levels, gain new abilities, and backtrack to older levels for a timepiece the game explicitly told them they didn't have the ability to get but actually could have anyway. It's brilliant level design, something that's hard to replicate, but A Hat in Time really does nail the non-linearity and level of secret optional content just like Dark Souls 2 does. And once again, the odd one out, Animal Crossing, no matter how different it may look, shares the same similarities with the Dark Souls series as our other case studies do. Animal Crossing, with its comparatively small game world of one town, is still too great in scope and too mind-blowing in medium to fit all the content on one screen, or even in one game state, even if all of the game's content can be loaded into the GameCube's RAM at once. In one game state, the player is a hot-headed pompadour sporting boy with a number on his shirt, and in another, the player is a cute girl who likes fishing and clam hunting. These two player characters cannot exist on one plane. It is impossible in the game, without hacking, to display these two objects simultaneously, which is just as nefarious, just as dastardly as hiding a ladder leading to Bow Undead and a plunging point for the Taurus demon is in the legendarily well-designed area of the Undead Burg. Truly, by nature of expanse, nonlinearity, and scale, these games, and in fact every game, is Dark Souls. But wait, there's more. Every game is Dark Souls because every game can be beaten in multiple ways. Every game can be beaten with your fingers. Every game can be beaten with your toes hitting the buttons. Every game can be played with a Guitar Hero controller. Some of these methods are easier than others, and some are player-enforced challenges, but what's so great about the medium of video games is that they inherently allow players to approach the same goal in slightly different ways. Cuphead, for example, can be played solo or with a friend, and the game changes dynamically depending on which mode is chosen. If multiplayer is chosen, players have double health and can generate more health out of nothing by reviving each other, whereas in single player, the player gets 3 health and cannot revive. The drawback is that 2 players creates serious on-screen chaos, and if the beautiful art style wasn't enough to distract players from basic pattern recognition, another player dilly-dallying, shilly-shallying, and shooting on screen will certainly chip off a few HP. These alternate game modes, these alternate methods of achieving the same goal, can be likened to challenge runs in Dark Souls, in which players don't use shields or only use the whip, or only allocate the faith stat. The systems of the game allow for player expression by giving multiple paths to the same goal. The same task can be completed in multiple different ways, and I think that's literally what video game depth is. You'd think that Dark Souls invented this, but actually, 15 years before Dark Souls, a humble title by the name of Super Mario 64 does the same thing. You know what that means, right? That means that Super Mario 64 is also inspired by Dark Souls. Super Mario 64 is Dark Souls. And yes, once again, both Crash Insane Trilogy and A Hat in Time use similar methods to achieve similar goals. Both these timeless titles treasure the technique of multiple goals and multiple methods. Insane Trilogy has an ultra-secret challenge mode in which the graphics turn to Commodore 64 polygons and the controls suddenly get kinda better, but the player can't die to get the gems, which creates a very interesting and unique mechanic, particularly in the manner this mode is triggered. In order to trigger Insane Trilogy's Commodore 64 mode, the player must go outside, purchase this archaic plastic box called the PlayStation. It doesn't have a number next to it, it's just a PlayStation. If the player plugs in a PlayStation into their CRT television and inserts one Crash Bandicoot by Naughty Dog game disc, the game suddenly gets kinda better, and it's a really fascinating experimental design choice that I wished that more reviewers would have picked up on, and that I wish more games would try replicating. This helps my tangential case of game reviewers sitting on their hands and waiting a decade or two before reviewing the latest title so that the public perception of the game can really come into focus. Anyway, back to Dark Souls. Crash Bandicoot is even more Dark Souls than Dark Souls because of this, pardon the pun, insane alternate method of completion. In conclusion, the journalists were right. They were always right. Cuphead, A Hat in Time, Crash Bandicoot, Insane Trilogy, and Animal Crossing are all Dark Souls. In fact, fuck it! Every game is Dark Souls, and one could say that Dark Souls is, in itself, in no way special for these elements, for they are ever present within the landscape of gaming history, but that's just how deep and influential Dark Souls is, and how much it has defined gaming in the past decade.
That should be a game theory video, like every game that came out after Dark Souls and even before Dark Souls, it's all Dark Souls.
That's the logical conclusion to this Dark Souls arc. For like someone to make the video that yes, literally every game is Dark Souls, let's move on now. We've settled the question. I would like that.
Yeah, just give them what they want.
Just give them what they want, and now they can shut up about it. Just let them have this one. Yes, journalists, you were right.
Diner
Now
Dash.
shut the fuck up and never bring this up again. That would be great.
Diner Dash imbues you with the same nihilism towards people, never satisfied the same way that people take what they want in the world of Lordran.
Yes, it's genius.